All set.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Today we're joined by members of the administration to talk about the zoning alignment project. And with that, I will pass it over to Roseanne to kick us off.
Thank you. Hello, council members, and thank you for inviting us to provide this update to the Zap project. I'm Roseanne Khalil. I'm the manager of zoning, and I am joined tonight by Kevin Kelly, manager of planning, in making this presentation to the council. Johanna Brennan from the law department is also here with us and a member of the Zap team. This is a project that has been in the planning and development since the adoption of 2034. As a lengthy project, it is important for us to provide periodic updates, and we expect tonight will be one of several over the course of the next 2 years until the new code is ready for adoption. With that, we're going to do a presentation, and I'm going to ask Matt to share his screen with the slides, and we'll walk you through it.
Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Let me get my screen set up here. Okay.
So we're going to give you an overview, and then at the end, we'll have time for some questions. As I said, the Zap project follows the adoption of Rochester 2034 comprehensive plan in 2019. It's important for a city to have a zoning code that is in alignment with the adopted comprehensive plan. So that is what this project is about, and that is the source of most of our decisions. The project began in the summer of 2020. We anticipate completion, meaning submission to the council for approval, in winter 23-24. So that would mean December to February, December 23 to February 24 is sort of our current target. So that's a pretty long distance away. We have a lot of work to do. The project team includes representatives from the Division of Zoning, the Office of City Planning, and the Law Department. We also have a consultant, which is Camiros, who you might most notably did the Green Code in Buffalo and has done many codes. And the City Planning Commission is our steering committee. We have also, in the process, continued to have community and stakeholder meetings throughout the entire process, from the very beginning to most recently in February with the last release of the code.
And I could take it from there. Thanks, Roseanne, for that.
You're welcome.
Background. So Roseanne and I will kind of handle most of this. You'll be hearing a lot from me tonight, mainly because in the stage of the project, it's really about the transition from the Rochester 2034 comprehensive plan, and more specifically the placemaking plan in there, which is sort of the land use tool that's in 2034, transitioning from that to updating our zoning code. So these sort of upfront months of the project are pretty heavily focused on the map and the allowable uses and that sort of thing. So it's a little bit more weighted towards the plan and the planning office's participation. But in future months, you'll see how that shifts a little bit more as we get into the weeds a bit more of regulations and proposed regulations, shifts a little bit more to the zoning office's leadership. So this is really a partnership that our two teams are working together on this. But at different times of the project, it's a little bit more focused on one group or the other. And at the end of the day, Roseanne's team in the zoning office, this is their code. This is their document that they are tasked with administering. So we want to make sure that they're comfortable with things, and so things will start to transition a little bit more over towards their leadership on this project. But let's just sort of continue with an overview of how this project is set up, what resources are available, how we're engaging the public, that sort of thing. And so this is just an image of the project website for the zoning alignment project. And if you'll bear with me technically here, I'm actually going to back out of PowerPoint and go to the website itself to show you how it's all set up and the different things that we have. So hopefully you can all see the Zap website now. Let me arrange my screens here a little bit more. There's our logo for the Zap. And So we've gotten a lot of great traffic on this website. People are really utilizing the resources, lots of feedback coming in. So on the homepage, you can sign up for project updates. We've got, I think, nearly 200 people that have signed up for project updates. And so we're like regularly putting out little blog posts to give folks updates and that sort of thing. There's an about section of the website here that gives some background on, why we're doing this project, the consultant that we're working with. We've got a FAQ section, that sort of thing, a way to contact folks. And then this last tab, or the second to last tab here, documents and presentations, is I think really important. And we like how this is sort of taking shape, because we have put up a lot of information on here that we think the community is going to be interested in, but we've also responded to a lot of requests from the community for more information. So, we've got a number of different documents that we've put up here for folks to look at, including, this is kind of the centerpiece right now, the draft zoning map itself. Hopefully council members have had a chance to take a look at this. This is an online version of the map that's interactive and accessible by anyone on a computer or a smartphone, where you can go in and see what we're proposing for the draft set of districts. I'll actually come back to this a little bit more later in detail as we walk through this, but I want to mention that that's kind of the primary link in here. But then we also, recognizing that an online map is not terribly easy to print, we got a request from folks to address that. So we published PDFs of each of the quadrants of the city that show the draft zoning district boundaries that make it easier for folks to print and take to their community at the neighborhood meetings and talk about it with the neighbors, that sort of thing. So we've got a lot of resources like that on here. Also, we've got information from the different boards and commission meetings that we've had, a lot of meetings with the City Planning Commission. The slide deck plus video of that discussion is up here for all of our meetings with them. And then down here at the bottom, the public input sessions that we've had. Again, the presentations and some video from those meetings. And this list will grow as the project progresses. And then we have, and this last tab here are the updates and events. So this is where, if you've signed up for updates, there are little blog posts that will appear here occasionally to talk about upcoming meetings, new resources available, that sort of thing. So we think it's a pretty good website that's useful for everyone involved to get to know what we're trying to do with this project. Let me go back to our slide deck here. 1 second. Okay, so let me talk a little bit more about the community engagement that we've done so far and that we plan to do. Starting with having a local steering committee that we're working with. And we decided to actually have the City Planning Commission serve in that role as sort of our advisory board or our steering committee. And they've been a really great sounding board from day one on this, talking through some challenging issues and getting their take on things. And this is a really diverse group. If you're not familiar with CPC, they're really well in touch with a lot of different issues in our city, and they know zoning inside and out. So they're working out really well as a steering committee. So we've met with them a half dozen or more times. Every time those meetings are open for the public to view, and then they're welcome to submit comments later. But then we have more interactive opportunities with the public, where it's not just inviting them to submit comments, but we're actually around a table, as you see in that picture, having conversations with folks. What are their hopes? What are their concerns? That sort of thing. So we did a round of a half dozen of those in February. And that was focused on the draft map and use table that we put out there. But that's just sort of the first round of intensive sort of workshops, if you will, with the community. And there'll be more rounds of that in the future. We've also done both internal and external stakeholder meetings, more than a dozen of those that happened in early last year. And what I mean by stakeholders, that's more sort of topic specific groups, developers or urban agriculture or that sort of thing. Transportation advocates had some more topic focused discussions with folks like that. And that also included a number of city staff in different departments that the zoning code is an important part of their day-to-day work. So we'll keep meeting with folks like that. And then we also have fairly regular attendance at the neighborhood presidents meetings, and they're very, as you can imagine, very, very interested in this project, very engaged. And there's lots of conversation at those meetings about this. And then throughout all of this, we have the ability for folks to submit comments through the website, and they can certainly send letters as well. And we're gathering that input and sort of organizing it, discussing it as a team, and figuring out what to do next with that. So that's kind of what we're doing on the community engagement side of things. So I mentioned this first round of about a half dozen meetings that we had with the public in February. That was based on sort of our first batch of documents that we released that are part of the draft code. And that's the list that you see at the top there. We started with the draft zoning map, the associated use table that says what we're proposing would be allowed or not allowed in each district. And then some of the standards that will come with those uses. And of course, making sure people understand exactly what we mean by certain uses. So clearly defining each of those uses. So that was kind of the first batch of the code, if you will, that we released. And that's what people are looking at now. We've gotten over 700 comments through the website from folks about that. Some really great feedback. And then moving forward, there'll be additional sections that we release. We're looking at later this month releasing another batch of sections of the code. A lot of it will be focused on sort of design standards for different districts. There's more beyond that, but that's kind of the focus. And then the last batch, if you will, would be later this fall. And there's a number of sections of the code that are maybe not as exciting as the map, but they're very, very important. And that's, the different procedures that we have here at the city to review development proposals and that sort of thing. So that's the batch that will come out later this fall. Now, I want to emphasize that even though we're kind of releasing these in batches, the process is additive. So even by the fall, when we're talking about some of the more drier things with procedural sections of the code, it's still in play. It's still on the table to talk about the map and folks' feedback on that. So that feedback will happen throughout the process. So that's just kind of an overview of what this project's all about, and the process we're looking at. I want to just take a minute here to really emphasize the goals that we have for the zoning alignment project. These are the things that we're always coming back to. This frames the process and our decisions that we make throughout, with the number one thing being aligning the code, as Roseanne said, and our zoning map with the Rochester 2034 comprehensive plan. This is not just good practice, but it's actually New York state law to have your zoning code be in alignment with a well thought out plan. We did not necessarily have that land use in place the last time around when the last code was updated in 2003. So we're fortunate to have a little bit of a better guide this time around. And we're finding that's been very, very helpful in the process to sort of fall back on Rochester 2034 as that guide. So other goals include expanding and diversifying housing choices to the degree that zoning can sort of set the fertile ground for that kind of development to happen. Looking for ways to increase economic opportunity, increasing the amount of area dedicated to a mix of uses as opposed to real strict segregation of uses, commercials all over here, residential's all over here. How can we find ways to have those uses a little bit more mixed and integrated? We're looking at ways to reduce nonconformities because that creates a lot of problems for both people in the community, but also our staff. So we want to find ways to make the code more user-friendly and simplify it within reason. A lot of what we're proposing in this code has to do with addressing a lot of the vacancies that are in our city and finding ways to encourage the reoccupation of vacant homes and buildings. We also are always mindful of how land use and transportation intersect. So promoting just a little bit more density along our transit corridors is this sort of tangible example of that. Looking for ways to increase climate change resiliency, and as I mentioned, making it a bit more user-friendly. So with all that as sort of the backdrop, let me just kind of give you sort of wet your whistle a little bit about what we're proposing in the draft code. And this is the draft set of zoning districts that we're proposing, which you'll see has a fairly good alignment or correlation with what the current set of districts are, with some intentional tweaks So we have our residential districts, our mixed use districts, and some other miscellaneous districts. And again, this is strong alignment with the placemaking plan in Rochester 2034 as it needs to be. So this slide here, and I won't go through these in any kind of detail, but we will provide this slide deck to you afterwards. You can come back to this as a reference. But this shows how the districts have a correlation with, the proposed districts in the ZAP have a correlation with the existing districts. So open space is a current district. Obviously, that's the same correlation there. But what we call R1 is going to be low density residential. R2 will be medium density residential, et cetera. So again, this slide can be just a reference for you later on if you want to understand how those districts relate to each other. We do have a new district that we're proposing here called the flexible mixed use district. That's the sort of the lighter brown. And that the intention of that new district is to create a space where our sort of legacy commercial and industrial buildings that are struggling to be reoccupied with traditional industrial uses, finding ways to sort of jumpstart those and get those reoccupied. So introducing some flexibility in what's allowed in that district. And you'll see that later on the map where that flexible mixed use area falls. Okay, so let me illustrate here with these slides how we are transitioning from the placemaking plan in Rochester 2034 to this draft zoning map. So on the top image here that you see here, this is, we're looking at Parcells Avenue and Beechwood, okay? In the placemaking plan, there is sort of a general vision expressed for the Parcells Avenue corridor, which is that we want a little bit more density along Parcells, the residential density. So that's why I see a little bit of a darker yellow here. And the lower density area would be in the residential side streets, right? So focus a little bit more activity here and even more activity at some important cross streets like Greeley and Stout, where we have this boutique mixed use designation. But you'll notice that those areas are sort of, they're rounded edges, there's sort of a buffer in between them, and they don't follow property boundaries. That was intentional at the placemaking plan stage to show that this is sort of a broad vision for the corridor, but it's not meant to get into a property by property decision. That's sort of what land use planning is. What do we want to see happen in this area? The transition we're in now is tightening up those edges and making those property by property decisions of which properties are appropriate to be in the medium density residential district, and then which would go in low density. And then what is that, how does this circle translate to an actual district for boutique mixed use, capturing those, the little, the four corners with the commercial buildings around that. So that's sort of the tightening up of the edges that we're doing now. And I'm showing you a fairly simple example here, but if you take time to look closely at the map, you'll see things get a bit more complex in other areas. So if we zoom out here, we see that this is showing again, the placemaking plan with the sort of the land use bubbles, if you will, that show the general vision for where densities and certain land uses are most appropriate. That was adopted in 2019. That is our guide. And as I toggle back and forth between that and the draft zoning districts, you can kind of see how those edges get tightened up. And so this here, the property by property district edges is what we bring to the community and say, okay, we took a stab at this, consistent with the vision of the plan. What's your reaction? How would you refine these edges? How would you tighten this up or make a little bit different decisions? And that's kind of the conversation that we're having with the community now. And I do want to emphasize that the project is meant to refine these edges and the associated regulations that go with those districts, but it's not really meant to substantially change the direction that's provided by the plan. So it's not really in play to say, well, I don't think this should be medium density residential. I think this should be low density residential. If we were to change this medium yellow to a light yellow, honestly, that would require going back to the drawing board with our comprehensive plan and looking to do an amendment to the plan. But if we wanted to make, bring a little property into this boutique mixed use or take one out, those are the kind of conversations that we're having now to sort of refine those edges. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of how the map works. Now I want to show you kind of return to the resources that are provided to the community so you can see what is available to them and how they're able to review this online. And I did mention the online map that you can use. We've also included, as you see here on the website, a link to a video tour of the draft zoning map. I'll play a quick little clip of that to orient folks.
You'll also see the layer list at the top. You can switch back and forth between the layers of the map and the About information panel. Under the layers, you'll see the proposed zoning districts. Just click on that layer to see the symbols for all the zoning districts. We'll get into what all of these mean shortly, but now you've got a legend for what you see on the map.
So you get the idea there. That's a little tour of the map, accompanied by music that you might hear in a JCPenney changing room. But hey, we're YouTube stars. We've got nearly 300 views on that. So hopefully that's helpful for folks as they take a look at the draft map that we've put out there. Another cool tool that we've provided, which I think is helpful for folks to understand what we're proposing, is what we call the Zap Swipe Map. And that's comparing existing districts to draft districts. So sometimes it's helpful to see, okay, what's the before and after of what you're proposing here? So let me pull that up and show you how that works. So it's got this cool little slider bar where on the right side of the slider bar and the right side of the legend are what we're proposing. That's the proposed zoning districts. And then on the left side are the existing zoning districts. So if we wanted to zoom into an area, you can control the slider bar and just move it back and forth left to right to see how this area is proposed to be changed. And you can even click on a given district and learn more about it by with this PDF link that actually takes you to the section of the comprehensive plan that describes the, in this case, neighborhood mixed use. So we think that's a useful resource for folks. We also have this other map here, what we call the upzone map. And this, you can take a little bit closer look at this later, but this essentially shows the term upzoning is basically when you move from a less or more restrictive district to a less restrictive district, meaning that more uses are allowed. So that, in that case, most folks are interested in what areas are being proposed to go from R1, which is our most exclusive, most restrictive district, to the next step up, which would be R2 or what we're calling medium residential. So this shows that light blue in the that light yellow and the medium yellow on the map, but then the blue edges highlight where that in fact is sort of an upzoning. So this is a good resource to see where we're proposing to increase or allow for a little bit of an increase in density. So we have a number of resources like that on the map. And then the last one I will point out is the use table. And this shows by district, like low density residential, medium density residential, which types of uses are proposed to be allowed as of right or require a special permit, which is the SP. We could really get into the weeds on that at some point, but I just want to show you conceptually what that's all about. So again, lots of cool resources on the website that we think people are taking advantage of. Want to give you a tour of that in case you wanted to look up any more information. With that, I will turn it back over to Roseanne to tell you about next steps for the project, and then we can have a conversation about any thoughts that you might have.
Okay, so wrapping this up, the next release of code sections is going to be in late May. As Kevin said, that's going to be the sort of bulk regulations, setbacks and yards and lot coverage, as well as design requirements for districts. That will be followed up with public meetings in June to give the public a chance to comment on what they've seen and also to answer questions they may have as they're reviewing it. The remaining sections of code we intend to release in September, which will also be followed by more public meetings. Once the entire code and map has been released and the public has had a chance to comment on it, we will begin our work on an environmental impact statement. So we will then transition to a draft environmental impact statement, or a DEIS, through seeker. that process will also have a public comment component to it. So we do see this to be a sort of continuum of information, comment, until we get to the point where everything has been reviewed, impacts have been explained, and everything at that point is ready to be reviewed by the CPC and then recommended from the CPC to City Council for adoption. And with that, I think we're going to open it up, and we know everyone is a bit short of time, but we're going to answer as many questions as we can or talk about it with you.
Great, thank you so much for this. I just had a couple questions pertaining to, I know at one point when we did some rezoning, we went to a lot of R1 districts, and it appears that in the zoning maps that I've had a chance to look at, there's a desire, especially around Center City, it looks like a big ring of R2 zoning. Can you maybe speak to that and the thinking around that in terms of changing back to an R2 residential?
Sure, I can start off and then I'll let Kevin finish. The way we approached districts being upzoned or going from low density residential to medium density residential was looking at several factors. One was what are the existing buildings in that area? What is currently there? And is it, even though it's called low density residential, is it in fact mostly made up of higher density residential uses? We looked at its position in terms of transportation and whether or not it's on a bus line or has other kinds of transportation attached to it. Excuse me. And with that, as well as other things, and looking at the placemaking plan. So the placemaking plan, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to talk about that, because that was the biggest driving force in some of these decisions.
Yeah, that's a great summary, Roseanne. That was the thinking behind the placemaking plan, is to increase the density for the reasons that you stated about what's actually on the ground. But so a lot of the decisions were based on existing character, and where things really change a little bit more is along those RTS routes where we want to. It's not really good land use policy to have your least dense district along a bus line. So we want to at least move up the ladder one step, and in other cases a couple of steps, to allow for and promote a little bit more density along those corridors. But Council President Melendez, as you keenly observed, the other piece of the sort of geographic factor there is there's sort of a concentric ring around downtown that where that little bit higher density is being encouraged. And then it's sort of gradually, as you move out away from the center, it's a little bit lower density.
Thank you. So any additional questions from council members?
I do.
Councilmember Gruber?
Thanks. Thanks for the presentation. I do look forward to receiving those slides, Kevin, and digging in a little deeper and listening to that JCPenney music and your narration. Looking forward to that too. So please send over links, send over the slides, because there's definitely a lot to dig into. I'm curious. I have two questions that are that don't seem related, but they are. I'll start out with the, I guess, with the more broad one. How do you feel the process is going? I'm sure you explained what the process is. I don't have any doubts that we're certainly trying our best to hear as many voices as possible. But in these situations, these types of projects are very challenging, especially challenging in, doing anything in 2022 has its own challenges. I'm just wondering how you feel the process is going in terms of engagement, in terms of getting the constructive feedback that's actually helpful for some of this work. I'm sure there's some hard conversations and some really negative feedback. Just if you could reflect on how things feel.
Okay. I'll go first. I joined this process in October of last year, so a great deal was done prior to my joining. And I would like to say that it was very easy to come into the process with my background and my expertise and join the work that's been done, because the work has been done very carefully and thoughtfully, and always with a check back to the CPC and others. And in terms of, I think we do struggle always with public participation. I think having in-person meetings, while there was a large group that wanted the in-person meetings, and they were productive, there wasn't a tremendously good, well, I should say we had like 6 of them. I would say 2 to 3 of them had really good turnouts, and the others were, 10 people. So, that's always difficult. I do hope that because this is an additive process, we started with the map and the use table, we're going to add more sections. There's going to be more information for people to get into, that maybe we'll pick up some steam. I will say the Zoom meeting we had was the most productive meeting we had, because when we did the breakout rooms, instead of it being sort of a war of Post-its on the map, or, someone coming and saying this opinion, and then the other person giving you their opinion, but they're not talking to each other. When we did the breakout rooms and the Zoom meetings, I think we were able to get more of a dialogue going between somewhat opposing views. So we're hoping to do more of those, even though we don't have to. I think we're going to maybe shift more towards Zoom meetings than in-person meetings. I could ramble on more, but I think it's always a struggle. But I think Kevin's group with that website has really provided just about everything anybody asks for. We want to know. We want to know where the drive-throughs are in the city. Okay, now there's a map up there with the drive-throughs in the city. We want to know, we want to see what the old zoning is right next to the new zoning. So we'll put together the swipe map. I think the responsiveness there has been tremendous. And it's a super website, and it's got all kinds of useful information on it. And with that, I think I'll let Kevin comment as well.
Yeah, thanks. I'll add one thought and also mention to invite a couple other folks to chime in if they want to. Obviously, Commissioner Miller, as Commissioner of NBD, has been involved, and we also have the Law Department represented by Johanna Brennan. And we've also been really glad to have John Brock from the Mayor's Office join us. He went to all 6 of those public meetings, and I know I observed him. He had some really great conversations with folks. But he wasn't participating he wasn't here, obviously, before January 1st. So he's relatively new to the process. So it's been good to have him part of it with sort of an objective second set of eyes, if you will, be part of this. But the one thing I did want to mention is that, one of the challenges of this project is that to do it right, it takes a while. It takes a few years to do this code. It's so complex, it's so big, and it's so important that we hear from the community and relevant stakeholders on this, that all of that adds up to, 2 to 3 year process. The downside to that is, what do we do with proposals that come across the permit counter now? That they're subject to the current zoning code, but to what degree are we taking into consideration the comprehensive plan and the upcoming revisions to the code? That's a little bit tricky. There's no textbook written on how to handle that. So we're handling those on a case-by-case basis. So there's sort of like an anxiousness, like, let's get this thing done so that we have a solid code, updated code to look to, but at the same time, you don't want to rush it. You want to do it right. So that's a little bit of a tension there, but we're working our way through that.
I'm going to add a little shout out to the Planning Commission, partly because we just had a meeting with them earlier this week, a couple-hour meeting, and we had some really substantive discussions with them. It was a little slow getting started, but once we got into some of the topics, it was wonderful to have the input of the Planning Commission on all these issues that we've been grappling with for weeks and months, and then have them, different approach, different set of eyes on the issues, and it was really helpful. So, and we're going to be continuing that process, of course, too.
That's great. Appreciate the answer. So now is my more specific question, and which is related. There, as I said, I know there's going to be some very controversial topics. I want to bring one up and just ask where we are on it, to the extent that you're willing to share or able to share. And that's ADUs. I am firmly on Team ADU. I know that there's probably a lot of people in the community who are concerned about ADUs. And that's why first that's the question, how the process is going. I think that kind of dialogue and potentially even tension is a healthy thing. But I really want to hear where you think we are on ADUs and how we're dealing with the some of the issues that people are bringing up, some of the legitimate issues people are bringing up.
Okay. So ADUs are interesting because Rochester 2034 does talk about them. And the guidance in Rochester 24 on ADUs is pretty explicit. And it says that, you know, at this point in time, we're not going to have specifically ADU, accessory dwelling units. So we do not actually in the new code have accessory dwelling units as a thing. However, what I will say is that within all the districts, particularly the residential districts, adding a dwelling unit is adding a dwelling unit. So if you are in a medium density residential district and you can meet all of the requirements to add a dwelling unit, then you can add a dwelling unit. If you can't, then you can't. Or you would have to go for a variance to do so. One thing that we've done in the code is we've eliminated the prohibitive variances. So right now in our current code, there are certain variances you cannot go for. And in the new code, we don't have that anymore. So there's always a path forward, but that path may require something like a variance or a special permit that puts you in a discretionary process where the public gets to have input. So it can be looked at on a case-by-case basis. So while we don't have an accessory dwelling unit per se as its own thing, I think the code does a good job of addressing dwelling units and density and balancing the desire to have more flexibility in the types of dwelling units and the density of dwelling units, while also balancing, you know, the needs of the neighborhood or the goals of the neighborhood to sort of keep the characteristic the same.
Yeah, I think
I'll have to just go back and look at the comp plans language around ADUs, because my impression was that it left it with a whole lot more of an opportunity to move forward with ADUs as something that we're actually using, that the city is actually using as a tool to build more affordable housing, a smaller number of units at a time, obviously. But I would really hope that at the end of the day, at the very least, this code is not prohibiting. And it sounds like that's what you're saying, Roseanne, that there's going to be some opportunity.
Yeah, I guess I'm saying that we are not calling anything an accessory dwelling unit, right? We're not using that terminology. However, we do have pocket neighborhood, which is an opportunity for tiny homes. We have increased density so that you are able to increase the number of dwelling units you have. We're not calling them accessory. It's something that's, I think, in there in the sense that we are providing more opportunity for different types of housing, for more density of housing, but we are not specifically having something called an accessory dwelling unit.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand like sort of how we're defining, because an ADU means different things to different people. There's sort of different iterations of that. And so I'll quickly try and walk through what those are, and my team can correct me if I have any of this wrong. But if you have in mind an ADU that is essentially, you know, an in-law apartment kind of in the back of the house that doesn't have its own separate entrance, that's just part of the single family home. Do I have that right, Roseanne and Johanna?
Yeah, well, if you have a house and, you know, on the first floor in the back, you have a bedroom and a bathroom and a seating area, and it's all part of your house and there's no separate entrance, then that's part of your house. I mean, if it's not separated out, if there isn't a separate entrance. So if you want to let your in-laws move in and build them a little addition on the back of your house that's part of your house, you can do that.
But it still has to meet the yard and space requirements.
Yes, yes, that's implied. They all have to meet the yard, the space, all of the bulk requirements, which is the stuff that's coming out in this next thing. You know, parking, all of those issues have to be met. There's no automatic waiving of anything.
Right. So if what you have in mind when you say ADU is a step further, which is an apartment on the back that does have bathroom, kitchen, and a separate entrance, what we consider that to be in the proposed code and the way it's arranged is a two-family home. So then you have to look that up in the use table. Okay, where are two-family homes allowed? And so that iteration of it is not allowed as of right in the low-density residential district. But you could apply for a use variance, as Roseanne said. So there's a path to it, but we're not saying that's allowed as of right. If what you're imagining with an ADU is, for example, a unit that's in a carriage house or above the garage, that sort of thing, that's a separate building. Again, team, correct me if I have this wrong, but that's essentially a second single family home, right? And then again, if it's in the low density residential, similar to R1, single family homes are permitted. You just have to check, to Dana's point, does it meet the bulk and lot coverage requirements? So in theory, you could have an ADU that's above, it's an old carriage house or above a garage, so long as it met those dimensional requirements. You could do that pretty much anywhere. So it's and these sort of limitations are really only about the low density residential district. Other residential districts, any kind of ADU is okay so long as it meets the dimensional requirements. So the limitations are really focused just on one area. Keeping in mind that one district, low density residential, has shrunk fairly substantially. So a lot more of the city would allow any version of ADU that you're thinking of.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Patterson.
So let me just kind of push on that a little bit, not for or against, but just some perspective. So we're going to stay on Mitch's Street with this one. So like 26 King Street. So there's a nice big 2-family structure in the back, 26, that's 26 and a half in the front. There is a 2-story house there. I'm thinking like 2-3 lots over. What is that? 2-3 lots over there, Mitch, behind one of our city employees' house. There's a I'd say it's a grandmother house back there, totally detached and separate from the main structure.
How much time you spent on my street, Mike?
Brother, I grew up on King Street. 26 and a half King Street. I lived there. So I can speak to it in detail. So that's why I'm asking. It's like, so are you telling us that's not allowed or that is allowed? We'll just kind of go a little easy. And if the answer is it depends, if you can give us some clarification, that'd be nice.
I don't know. I mean, you're telling me what the houses look like, but I don't know what they're permitted for or what sizes. I mean, I don't have it up on my screen or any information.
And I get that. So my thing is, like, historically, we got a bunch of those around the city. There are some neighborhoods are kind of known for them. So are we going back? So I guess the question in general is, are we going back to the future here? Or are we saying, no, not really? I mean, I'm just, and if you don't have an answer, that's fine. But if you can kind of flesh that out as you're working through it, that'd be great.
In that
To clarify, are you describing, I guess I'm not clear on what you're describing in terms of, are they multifamily houses that are in a low density
No, they're
district?
separate structures. They are separate.
So it's one property with multiple single family houses on it?
One has, so at 26 King, 26 and a half King, you have a single family structure in the front. You have a 2-family structure in the back.
Okay.
Down a couple lots over, you've got I believe it's a 2-family structure in the front and a 1-family structure in the back.
So we do have a lot of lots.
And it's currently zoned as R2. So
Okay,
so R2, so 2 families permitted.
Zoned. Right.
We do have a fair number of lots in Rochester that have more than one houses on them that
Right.
have two that, you know, and they're existing non-conforming because they generally do not meet the lot size requirements, but they're existing non-conforming. So going forward in medium density residential, if you have the lot coverage requirements, and that's true of the existing code. For instance, there's a property on East Avenue, a rather large piece of property that's going to put an additional building on it because the lot is big enough that they have enough square footage and they can do all the setbacks in the yards to allow them to put a second building on that property. As long as you meet those requirements, you can. When I'm looking at here is property that probably would not because it's very tiny, but those would be existing non-conforming.
Okay, so you wouldn't be able to do it going forward, but since it's already there, it's already there. Got it.
Yeah, but you would if you combine, again, if you combine some lots, if you had a lot big enough, you could. It's all a matter of sort of balancing out your property size with your, how big your size has to do with it too, because there's coverage as well. You know, tiny houses take up less coverage. There's a lot of factors that weigh in designing it.
So we could possibly be looking at adding tiny homes in, I guess we're not going to call it, whatever the medium density districts are. So the possibility of adding tiny homes in medium density districts is something we could be looking at.
If the lots were big enough and they got, so it's a couple of things. So the lots have to be big enough, but we also have setbacks. And so generally, if you have one building behind another building, you're not going to comply with either the rear yard or the front yard setback on one or both of those buildings. So there might be an area variance needed for setbacks. Something like that could happen. So there's a variety of things that could stop it or permit it. I know that's not a good answer, but it really is property by property dependent.
It's a great answer, because your real answer is the code is going to be consistent across the board. Across the
6-3.
Yeah.
That consistent. So that's a great answer.
Yeah, and Councilmember Patterson, to be clear too, that answer is true for all residential when it comes to the idea of a tiny home. It would be possible in any residential district, subject to some nuance of dimensional regulations and design and that sort of thing. But as a permitted use, it's essentially a single family home. So.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Any additional questions from council members? Great. Okay. So hearing none, I just wanted to ask one final question. I know there's been a lot of community engagement already, which is important. And I just want to know, in terms of a quad-based strategy, is there going to be a quad by quad engagement of the public at some point? And if so, what point in the process would that happen?
So we did the maps on a quad by quad engagement because that allowed us to look at a smaller piece of the map at a time. And because everybody wants to know about their neighborhood, so the quad by quad approach seemed appropriate. Going forward, however, with the next section applies to the whole city. So we were not going to do a quad, or we currently don't plan to do a quad by quad. We were going to do several meetings and allow people to sign up for any meeting until we had too many.
So will those meetings rotate throughout the city then? Or will they be online? I'm just thinking about the different ways to engage residents in the process.
Mm-hmm.
The next round are actually going to be virtual, so that anybody could engage, or most folks could engage. But we could definitely, we're kind of always thinking about that dynamic. So then the round in the fall that we're looking at, we could potentially do that again, or more of a quadrant base, or a mix of virtual and in-person meetings. But as Roseanne said, that when it was really map focused, that made a lot of sense to do meetings in all four quadrants plus downtown. But we're open to suggestions.
Thank you. I would suggest that there is some kind of engagement at the neighborhood level or at the rec center, or so. I know this is more work to produce, but there's a lot of folks that still don't have access to Zoom and tech and all of that. And I just want to make sure that there's, at some point in the process, additional opportunity for folks to engage again. So, but I do appreciate the work that you've done so far today. It looks great. And I think we're probably gonna have additional questions as we dive deeper in.
Of course.
We certainly see that there's been a lot of work done here.
Council President, could I just make a quick comment before we wrap?
Yes, Commissioner Miller, please.
Thank you. I just want to thank the team for this presentation and for all the work that they've done. It is, as you can see from what you've seen today and what you've seen at the meetings, it is a lot of work. There are a few areas that we still are going to be focused on, and I ask council to really, if you can, just take a look and dig into this a little bit, because there are some things that we would really like to make sure we're getting right. For example, there's only one zoning area now that will allow, in the proposed code, that will allow drive-through restaurants. or drive-through kiosks. So, that is a little bit of a concern because, as Roseanne said, we just sent out a map that shows where all the restaurants are located. And interestingly, but not surprisingly, because I know this every day, there's not one in the entire Southwest quadrant. Neither a drive-through restaurant or a drive-through ATM. So, there's a bit of an equity issue if we prohibit these uses. I've already gotten calls from folks who want to put a drive-through restaurant and a drive-through bank at Bull's Head, but under this new zoning, neither of those locations would be allowed. So we need to, we need to tighten up some of those things, and we know that, and we will. We also know that I'm getting on a daily basis letters from folks saying, I really don't like the idea that you're expanding two-family residential uses. And I know that Kevin's got those, and I'm pretty sure Roseanne has as well. So we just need to make sure that we're addressing that. There is a significantly limited number of locations for other auto-related uses like sales or car washes or auto body or even gas stations. So we need to take a look at that, and we will. And there was a problem with the locations allowed that allowed sexually oriented businesses or SOBs. That has been fixed. So I appreciate the work on that to take that whole column of uses and move them out of the one column into industrial. So this is a living, breathing kind of thing. We'll continue to work this. We'll continue to remedy issues as we find them, and ideally be able to move this forward in a way that is beneficial to the city, beneficial to businesses, and has things working in a better way. So thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thanks everyone for your hard work on this again. We really appreciate the update. We look forward to hearing more as you get further along in the process and being involved. And we certainly will have additional questions, I'm sure. But thanks again for your time. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.